women are now underrepresented in building AI tools, and it's turning out women are underrepresented in AI adoption. It's a problem I'm really motivated to help fix.
Hello, everyone. This is going to be the last AI learning series for this whole module. So 2 weeks ago, you learned from Marilee about the difference between journalist versus AI PM. Last week, we talked about security and risk. And today, we have Yana to talk to us about how do you do product analytics with AI. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Yana to kick things off.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. So I am Yana Willander. I am CEO and founder of Craftful. I'm so excited to lead this session on AI and product analytics and decision making. It's a topic I am very, very passionate about. To give you a little bit of an intro on me, before Craftful, I led product at various tech companies. I've done everything from being the PM number 2 at a fast-growing unicorn to heading up product management teams with products that were being used by millions of users. So I've really seen teams struggle with using both product analytics, but also actually kind of data that we were getting from different sources. So things like surveys, user interviews, support tickets, sales calls, social media. One of the products I worked on had a really big subreddit community, so just using all of that feedback. And I was lucky to be one of the earliest alpha users of GPT-3. So this use case was really top of mind for me when I started experimenting with large language models. And so I immediately built my first prototype to solve that pain point for myself. It seemed like a perfect use case for large language models, and that's how I got to start building AI tools to supercharge product managers. But I have one thing that I'm particularly passionate about, and I'm sure you've all seen this meme in some version on the internet. And I think the underlying point is that the future is AI, and professionals using it will get ahead. And I have a particular beef with the current AI development, which is that, it's a well-known fact that women are underrepresented in product management and tech. That's why Women in Product exists. That's kind of the what we're here to empower product managers. But there's also this piece that women are now underrepresented in building AI tools, and it's turning out women are underrepresented in AI adoption. There's been a few recent surveys on this, and they show that majority of male professionals have started leveraging AI, but less than a third of female professionals have started using it in their day-to-day. And I think that's a huge problem. It's a problem I'm really motivated to help fix. It actually motivated me when I was putting together this session. I really wanted it to be very tangible in terms of how to think about AI that's underlying some of the tools that I'll talk about, but then also give you the tools to think about frameworks to think about how are all of these AI tools in different products being built today, so that you have a sense of, are kind of able to evaluate them. And I really want to give female PMs an edge in being early AI adopters, so that we can be great. So with that, kind of my goal for this session, or agenda for this session, is to give you an overview of AI tools that you can use in product decision making. Some of these tools are actually still in kind of the earliest stages, but I'll give you more context on that. But I'm going to start with tools that can help you with quantitative data, then finish with tools that you can use for qualitative data. My goal with both is to show you how you can use them, but also give you a look under the hood so that you can learn how these tools work, how they're built. And then I'll zoom in on Craftful in particular, because I just have more control over giving you an under the hood view, or a deeper under the hood view. All right, let's dive in. Practically speaking, GPT-3 API has been available for a few years now. As I mentioned, I started building the first prototype of Craftful in early 2020, so this is technically not that new now. But for product analytics providers, I think they mostly started feeling the pressure to launch LLM-powered features after the ChatGPT came out last fall. And then the ChatGPT API launched in March, which is really when everyone could start building with the models that are used for ChatGPT itself, which are more recent models than the GPT-3 model that was previously available, or the GPT-3 models, I should say. There were quite a lot of iterations of those. Since then, all the product analytics providers have been rushing to launch AI features, starting with a company called June, which is probably the smaller ones of this group, to then they launched their solution, their AI solution in April, and then Mixpanel launched one in July, and Amplitude launched one in August. And so it's now been a few months since all of these launches. And so I'm curious, how many of you have used any of these AI features in product analytics? I'm going to hand it over to Evelyn to kind of moderate a poll just so we can get a sense.
Yeah, since we have a mighty team, it will be great if you all can, number one, turn on your camera. It's always lovely to see your face. And then number two, you have the reactions at the end of your Zoom. If you have used AI for your product analytics, just hit the heart so we can get a sense of whether you, okay, I'm calling Takara, Kelsey, Carolyn. Okay, not that many people have used AI in their product analytics.
Yeah, and that is not surprising. And in fact, as I'll explain in a minute, if you haven't used it, you haven't missed much yet. And in fact, by joining the session, you are actually going to be in many ways ahead of most folks, including as I will talk about some of these product analytics companies themselves, because they're actually still in the process of building this. So and that's not, that's not how it looks. So as you may have noticed on that timeline that I just showed previously, Amplitude was actually last on the timeline to launch AI features, but that's not what it looked like on their launch day. This is a note from their CEO saying, we're the very first company to make this generally available, and then they invite everyone to try it out. So then I wanted to do a little bit of a zoom in terms of what by the way, I should note, we're an Amplitude customer. Unfortunately, I can't demo our Amplitude dashboard because it has all of our sensitive user data in it, but I try to give you as much of a sense of what these features are. So let's look at this. Okay. So here's the feature that they launched in August. And so at a high level, you can ask natural language questions, and then Amplitude will create a chart that answers that question. If you haven't used this feature yet, don't feel bad. It turned out it doesn't actually exist. So if you click through from his notes to their website, it has that video that I showed. And that's kind of the biggest glimpse you can get of this feature now. But then if you clicked that you want to actually use it, it has this form. It doesn't actually, well, we've signed up, and I think there's a few early users who are potentially using it. But I think that this video hopefully gives enough of a view so that we can later jump to a under the hood view to talk about how would a feature like this be built, what sort of prompts under the hood would empower Amplitude to do this. How would a feature like that work, where you go from just a natural language question to an actual chart? But before we do that, let's look at what Mixpanel launched in July. So if you haven't used that feature, unfortunately, just like Amplitude, it actually is not generally available either yet. I signed up a good while ago. We still don't have access to it. Compared to Amplitude, though, I think, conceptually, and one thing that I wanted to talk about, kind of just like how to evaluate once all of these features become generally available, how do you evaluate the usefulness of, Amplitude feature versus the Mixpanel feature? And I would say that probably compared to Amplitude, Mixpanel has more to win from an AI experience like this. The product was always kind of a little bit more technically complicated. It was designed for kind of more of the technical product managers. So they have a bit of a gap that I think they can fill with natural language prompts like this, where you can make it more accessible to a broader audience. Whether they will successfully do that remains to be seen, because this feature is not yet generally available. But luckily, the June feature is generally available. And so I've had a chance to play around with this. We are, both an Amplitude and a June user. And so I do have, we have our own data directly in June. I've pulled up here a screenshot that doesn't include our data as much as possible, because there is some sensitive information. But what I would say is that the June feature is very similar to Amplitude, to what Amplitude and Mixpanel are building, which is probably not surprising. They were first to launch it a few months before Mixpanel and Amplitude's marketing launches. So they had probably some inspiration there in terms of what to build. But I wanted to jump to more of sort of an under the hood view. When you enter this in June and you say how many users signed up this week, you get an answer, right? Like in this case, signups 1,200. But you can also open up this code view where you can see how they translated my natural language prompts into an SQL query. So June uses GPT-4 to translate questions like how many users signed up last week into this SQL code that can then be executed against their database. This doesn't look like standard SQL to me, so I think it's probably have some, they have a prompt that generates SQL that's specific to the database that they use. And you can do more complex things, like you can ask how many users use this feature every week for the past 2 days. But if you do that, you have to ask more complex questions, like you have to break it down into multiple steps. Like you will need to ask, give me a unique count of users that triggered event X in the last 2 months, and then you'll need to ask for, look only at events where the property is named a certain value, and then give me just the folks for the last 2 months. So in some sense, you almost need to know SQL to be able to do kind of some more of these kind of like complex analysis. It's still maybe faster than writing all of the queries yourself, but I think there's definitely some evolution here in terms of where it can go to become more useful. But you may be wondering, how does June get from my question to an SQL query? And so under the hood, June rephrases your question based on what it knows about your data, your event names, and so on. It only works if you use the really simple questions like I did here. And then it sends your modified question as part of instructions to the OpenAI ChatGPT API. This, what I have here, is a visual representation of what a call to that API looks like. It is, if you've played, I'm sure you've all played around with ChatGPT, so it's not unlike ChatGPT, but on the side here you have a system prompt which tells the model some underlying information, like what June knows about your data. And then you can adjust things on the right here for things like which model you want it to use. So you can say, I want to use GPT-4, or I want to use that, which is the most performant model, or I want to use GPT 3.5, which is a cheaper and faster model, or any other model that you want to use. And then you can create additional, you can use these additional prompts to do things like, how creative do you want the model to be? So you see that I've picked temperature 1. Temperature 0 is the least creative solution. It's going to be the most factually accurate, but that actually sometimes causes the model to return very little information because it's almost kind of, it feels like it's being interrogated and will just give you kind of like super short answers to your questions. And so usually temperature 1 is usually a good baseline. In fact, if you go and use Playground, which is what I'm using now for the OpenAI API, it will by default set the temperature to 1. For certain applications, we usually use temperature 0 because we're worried about hallucinations and things like that. But you can also do things like you can tell it how long you need the answer to be. Here, the maximum length is set to 256, which is also the default, but you can set it to be longer, which means that sometimes the answer will get cut off. All right, so here I'm sort of guessing at what June's prompt may have looked like. I think they probably have some specific things there that are very specific for their database. And so you will see that, you know, the SQL code that I got is a little bit different from what they got in their when I opened up the box, right? You know, as I mentioned before, sending over my question, they probably rephrased it slightly. So they may have looked for things like sign up in my question and replaced it with an event that they think may be my sign up event. Or another approach may be that they are getting an output where they're asking the model to give them an output that has blanks that they can then fill in with events that they know correspond to my data, right? So there's a few different approaches that you can do, and I'm sure they've experimented with all of them to get to the best possible prompt. Okay, let's double click one more step. What actually happens here, right? Because this is almost in some sense a black box, right? Like June gave GPT-4 this information, and GPT-4 gave it a response with an SQL query, magic, right? But what is actually happening? So once this prompt is sent over to the ChatGPT API, the model translates the message into tokens, which is, you know, common sequence of characters found in a set of text. And based on all of that text that GPT-4 has been previously trained on, the model has learned to understand kind of the statistical relationship between these tokens so that it can predict the next most likely token in a sequence. And that's, you know, that the sequence is the prompt that I sent over, and the model predicts, okay, what's the next thing? And then it starts returning the next thing. And so the input for the model actually becomes both the prompt that I provided and everything it's outputted to me when it's writing the next most likely token. Because the model has been trained on both text and code, it can predict both how a person would respond to my question, like how many users used my product or signed up last week, and actually the SQL code that would be written to respond to my question. You know, I think this, hopefully, I'm gonna pause there and see if you have any questions on this before I dive deeper. Any questions? I know this is.
Just wanted. Oh, sorry. Hi, my name is Amal. Nice to meet you, Yana. I just wanted to quickly confirm when you said that the model is using both the question and then this SQL code, you meant the SQL code that it's generating as it tries to answer the question. It continues to build off of that based on the probability of future tokens based on the set of tokens it's already generated.
Yeah, great question. So apologies, that was not as clear as I wanted it to be. But basically, when I sent over how many users used triggered the sign up success event in the past week, the model starts predicting the next thing to return to that. So it will start predicting the most likely, because I asked a question in natural language, the first thing that will return will be a natural language word 2, right? And so then it starts predicting. At some point, because I asked for, well, you can't see that in this particular screen view, but in the previous one, I did ask for an SQL query directly in the system prompt, right? So then it knows that at some point, the statistically most likely thing is to start returning code. And so it does that. And then the next thing after that will again be code, just to complete the code sequence to statistically most likely respond to the thing I was asking for in the combination between the system prompt and the prompt that I provided. And so that's how it gets to this complete response. I will note that I think, of course, we don't know, right? Because I am, in some sense, I am guessing at what June is doing under the hood, right? I don't have a complete view into exactly what they're doing, but my guess is that they are probably asking the model to give just an SQL response so that they don't have to parse all of the natural language. But though they could also be getting a complete prompt and then just look for SQL code in the output. There's a few different ways to do this. You know, we do a lot of this too, because we do get both code and in natural language in the inputs that we send over to the model. So we have to think about that as well. I think most folks building with LLMs have to think about that right now in terms of what's the best way to construct their user experience in their product. Cool. The very last thing I will well, actually, sorry. I did want to note on the fact that, right, we only looked at what June is doing, but because Mixpanel and Amplitude solutions are very similar, I think it gives you an idea of how the Mixpanel and Amplitude product is going to work eventually. Of course, you know, you're not able to, for most folks, you're not able to try it out quite yet, but you can, depending on how you've set up your tracking, you can start experimenting with June, right? We are an Amplitude user, but we use Segment for tracking in our products. We're able to pipe that data into June as well and start experimenting with AI features in June, since they are generally available. But the other piece that I wanted to flag, which is really the slide you're looking at here, is that you can do the same thing in ChatGPT. You can get ChatGPT to write an SQL query for you, and then experiment with that. If you have your own setup right now for analytics, this is another way to experiment with it even before some of these features are available inside Amplitude and Mixpanel. Oh, sorry, I have a question here from Carolina.
Hi, yes, thank you.
Oh, Carolina, it looks like you're muted.
Thank you so much for this intro. I'm very experienced on Amplitude and Segment because that is something that we use at Aspiration. So I think it might be easier to understand, maybe breaking down to a scenario. I mean, we use Amplitude, so Segment, it was used to at every single point into the onboarding flow, we knew exactly where they were. And there's a lot of levels, like when somebody lands in the page, if somebody clicks in the button, if they do if it's an impression versus a click. So it might be helpful for the extended team to really kind of hone into a specific example. For example, let's say that you have a landing page and somebody clicks there, and then how do you integrate the segment event that happens with the Amplitude? Because in Amplitude, then you have the funnel from the beginning to end, and you know where people are dropping off, and you say, okay, this is a conversion of 30% per se. What I'm interested to know is, like, when you are ingesting the data in ChatGPT, how are you using the segment data? Are you using the Amplitude? How is that transition of data goes back and forth? Because I think if we kind of break it down to a simple example, then somebody who has used, like, I'm very experienced onboarding, would know how, at least to start with a simple scenario, and then post these things somebody can build on top of that. I think it might be very helpful.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I should clarify, in neither of these examples, including the one I'm now showing with ChatGPT itself, but also with June, and most likely how Amplitude and Mixpanel are building it, they're not actually sending their data to ChatGPT. They are only sending in the question that the user is asking, to create an SQL query that then they're using on their end to query the database. So it's a very kind of different flow from how you may think about it, but they're really just using large language models to translate natural language into SQL, not to interact with the data that's being collected by Segment or and then interacted with by Amplitude.
So they do a query, they send this natural language, put it in ChatGPT. ChatGPT comes back with a suggested SQA format, and then are they supposed to plug it in the backend in Amplitude and see the answer and result and just kind of go back and forth?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Great question.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, so really, there's really just one step on the process. It's really just making it easy for you to not have to write that query and not have to like interact with. I think Mixpanel in particular has this problem more so than Amplitude, that it's kind of hard to find how to set up some of these things. It takes a while, and they're trying to make it easier for you by just surfacing, you know, when you will go, I assume that when you will ultimately, once these features are available, when you go to your Mixpanel or Amplitude dashboard, all you see is a search box or like a text entry box, and you ask your question, and then that's kind of how you start interacting with all of these features.
Thank you.
Cool. Oh yeah, sorry, Amal.
Hi, I just wanted to make sure I fully understood what that flow looks like. So when Amplitude passes over the natural language prompt to ChatGPT to translate it into SQL, how does ChatGPT know how to structure that query that maps back to what the company's data structure is?
Yeah, so this is where I think they are using probably the system the system prompt. And so they're sending in information about their own structure, so that, and you know, here I used the very simplified version just because it's hard, you know, on a slide, it's hard to get all of that information. But that's probably where they would send in that information as part of the system prompt or as part of the prompt itself. It is also possible. One quick note, that now that there's more opportunities to fine tune some of these models, not GPT-4 per se, but GPT 3.5, you can fine tune. It is also possible that they may be fine tuning the model to respond in a specific way to based on their data and how their database is set up. I have a question from Dina.
Hi, Jana. I'm Dana. Nice to meet you. Maybe just to confirm my understanding. So is there sort of like a pre-step, just building on what you were saying, where there's like the structuring of the database and the labeling in some sense of the inputs is incredibly important? And if like as the company, maybe, I don't know, creates new events or you have a new flow, you have to keep adding to that table or data structure in order for these queries to work properly?
That's right, absolutely. And so, and I can imagine this actually is a big challenge to make sure that it does work. I imagine that's kind of why they've done it. Most of these companies have done a marketing launch and not actually launched the product yet, because I can see lots and lots of edge cases where the model does something very similar but not specific to your to how your data is structured, or maybe the event's name is slightly off, and that of course then changes everything, and the query doesn't work.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, any more questions on this?
I would wrap it up to a way, it's like, as ChatGPT answers, it should be caution. We have to be cautious that it's providing the best based on the data that it has, but it's prone to could be issues. So it's about us as a product leaders to really go back and work the data scientists to really assess them that is correct.
Absolutely. I would say, you know, one way if one piece that you know, if you're not as familiar with writing SQL and you're actually trying to get ChatGPT to write an SQL query for you, one suggested solution that I've heard folks use a lot is to have ChatGPT write the SQL query for you, and then plug it and then copy and paste it into a new ChatGPT conversation and ask ChatGPT to explain in natural language what's happening in the SQL query to make sure that it actually was correct. So it's just another way of double checking that it did. Of course, it still doesn't help you with did it interpret my events correctly, right? But at least this is a way to double check that the query itself is correct.
And I didn't change the sponsors.
Cool. All right, let's move to qualitative analysis. So here I'm going to do a little bit less guesswork because I have more control over seeing exactly what happened under the hood because I was part of building one of these products. But in this case, we as I mentioned, we already started building with GPT-3 way before ChatGPT was available, and even for the ChatGPT API, as a Y Combinator backed company, we had early access to the ChatGPT API, so we could actually start building some of these features even before the ChatGPT API was generally available. It did still launch in March, and the other tools that I've pulled up in terms of qualitative analysis that hopefully you're all familiar with, and maybe some folks I saw from the survey responses that some folks use today are Pendo and Sprig, and they also launched similar features for their survey analysis. So I'm gonna deep dive into specifically what they launched and then give you an under the hood view of how those features can work based on how we've built our features, which are also similar to what they've built. All right, so switching to Pendo. So in the past, kind of just to set the stage, right? You would have collected all of your feedback via the Pendo survey tool, and then you would need to manually review all of the feedback to figure out what users were requesting. So now Pendo is using GPT-4 to summarize all of that feedback into this kind of paragraph that you can see here that tells you for all the users who are requesting a dashboard feature, here's specifically what they're talking about. Here's specifically what users are talking about. This feature also is not currently publicly available. So similar to Amplitude and Mixpanel, there's an interest list for this. But I think that Sprig actually has launched their feature. And what they do is they summarize, similar to Pendo, they summarize survey data that users send out from Sprig. But unlike Pendo, you can also ask specific questions about the surveys, in addition to kind of the high-level takeaways that you see that they have there in the screen.
Okay.
Is that a question or no? Okay, I think someone just went off mute. All right, so and then for Craftful, I'm actually going to jump to a demo and give you a live view because I can do that. And then I'm going to do a under the hood view to show you how all of these tools work. We have both the features that both Pendo and Sprig are building. And so I'm going to give you a real-time view. I assume you guys can now see this screen, right? All right, perfect. So, so conceptually, Craftful is similar to Pendo and Sprig, or what they're building, in that we're analyzing user feedback. But then, in addition to analyzing survey data that you get from Pendo or Sprig, we also collect, the left part seems to be cut off. Let's see. What part of the, Rashmi, would you mind clarifying what part of the left side is cut off?
Yeah, I think the page is not aligned to the area that you're sharing. I think if you scroll right and left, then we could see the whole screen.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It was fine actually till like 5 minutes ago, I think.
How about now?
I think it seems like it's okay for others. Sorry, it's just me, I think. Yeah, this is what I can see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But
Sorry
this
about
is
that.
good. Yeah,
Okay,
this-
okay, cool. Hopefully do let me know if you guys are not seeing what I'm showing. Perfect. All right. So but in addition to collecting survey data, we summarize feedback from support tickets, App Store reviews, user interview notes, sales calls, and what I'm going to show you, and there's currently over 35 sources that are supported, but we're always adding more. So if there's a source that you're particularly interested in, feel free to let me know either during the session or at any point after this. But what happens is that when you do connect a source, say we connect the Nest iOS app, for Nest, you can connect data for 30 days or a year. In this case, I'm going to do 30 days so that hopefully we can get the summaries during this call, because a whole year takes quite a bit. They have a lot of feedback. Once you connect the source like App Store reviews or support tickets or survey data, we will then collect all of that data daily and summarize it to extract product insights and then send them to you either via email, or if you connect Slack, you get that. That way your whole team gets access to it. I'm gonna, while waiting for this data to load, I have pulled up the Android App Store reviews for Nest so that we can look at those. And once you've connected a source, you get automatically lists of feature requests, lists of kind of what users love about the product, competitors mentioned, main complaints, and then you get these summaries daily and weekly and monthly, right? And since we're collecting all of that data every day, you constantly get new updates there. And then you can both look at kind of all of the different sources that you have, and then once this is probably still running, so I'm not going to do a all sources analysis, but once you have data from various sources like App Store reviews, survey data, call transcripts, you can also do a summary across all of those different sources and get a similar type of view. Since we're automatically importing this data, you may not have access to the raw data depending on where it's coming from, if it's support tickets or survey data or sales call transcripts from Gong. You can also view the raw source, so then you can see all of the kind of the App Store reviews that got summarized in your summaries. To go back here, once in addition to kind of extracting these product insights like feature requests or what features users care about the most, we also make it easy to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive. So you can, you can see the mentions, how frequently. I'm going to pull up a little bit more data here so we can see a bit of a bigger view, right? The monthly view, for example. And here users want improved ability to recognize when the user is home. You can click on the mentions to get a sense for, okay, when did this actually got mentioned and what do users say about that, right? Oh my God, this app keeps thinking I'm not home when I am and puts the AC in 80 degrees, right? So like you can get a bit more context on specifically what did users say when they mentioned this piece of feedback. And then the other way to do the same thing is to ask follow-up questions via chat. This is kind of similar to I think, the feature that Sprig is demoing, where you, for their surveys, you can ask follow-up questions about the data. So you can say, oops, I'm just going to move my microphone for a second. What do users say about scheduling? Okay, so, and then you can dive deeper and you can ask follow-up questions about when users are not able to do something, what do they do instead, and that kind of stuff. But also, what do users say about pink elephants? There's no mention of pink elephants. And the reason I'm highlighting this is that when I do a bit of an under the hood view, you'll get a sense that the way this is said is really to think as a product manager, and it's also constrained by the feedback that's provided to it. And as a result, it's not going to hallucinate. It's not going to try to creatively come up with an answer to the question you asked. It will say, this is just not mentioned in the user feedback. So you get a better kind of sense of what it's doing. And then once you've identified the features that you may be interested in, I'm going to pull up, say, let's do previous week. And there may be some things here that I find interesting. I can either, invite my team to come and check it out, or export it as a CSV file or a PDF file, or I can create user stories with this. And so let's say I think that the button for manually turning on heating may be interesting, and option to set specific temperatures are interesting features that we're not yet working on, but I would like the team to do. Then I can go and start create user stories for this. So I'm going to call these, what is it, October 24th user stories. Go ahead and create these user stories. May take a while. Okay, and then once I have these user stories, I can go ahead and export them to Jira. I'm going to pick my projects, say that they're tasks and not Jira tickets or epics. And then here they are. And then you can start editing them. And we've also shared a view into what was the sort of the underlying issues that you're responding to in this particular feature request. Cool. I am going to jump back to the deck to give you a bit of an under the hood view into how all of this works. Oh, sorry. Actually, let me not do that. Rashmi, do you have a question?
Yeah, a quick question. This is really cool, Yana. So in the first step, when you selected these two, features to convert them to user stories, you clicked on the user stories, and then it actually added its own acceptance criteria. Is that what I saw before you took it to Jira?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it wrote the user story based on. It actually didn't just write the user story based on the summaries. It then pulled all of the user feedback that is underlying that summary, and then it writes a user story and acceptance criteria. And of course, it's a first draft of an acceptance criteria. Right. You're probably going to know something that's not included in the user feedback that you will want to edit here, but it just gives you that first draft that you can start with.
Oh, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. I'm gonna give you an under the hood view into specifically what goes into a prompt like that to get that in a second. But just gonna see if there's any other questions before I jump to that.
I have one that, if I could, they asked in the chat, but when you're originally pulling the data sources in, once you connect that, was there an initial set of questions that you as a user have to ask for it to be separated into the categories, or does Craftful extract what we know for feedback that we want to know? Top issues, top complaints, top things we like. I mean, do you already have those pre-built into there, or does somebody need to intercept and ask those first?
No, we already have those pre-built. We have on our roadmap, we have additional set of questions that you will be able to do, like if you want to do, SWOT analysis or like jobs to be done or additional types of questions that are in addition to the things that's already pre-built. But at this point, all you do is you're selecting your source, you're adding it, and then you get these summaries. And actually, hopefully, maybe let's see if the one that I connected previously may be available. Yeah, so this is the iOS app that I created when we just started. And now you have all of these lists ready and available. Yeah, Carolina?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to kind of, so what applications are you connected to? Are you connected to send all the way for customer service tools like Zendesk, CRM, Salesforce, as well as social media? Like,
yeah. So yes, so interesting. I'm not able to scroll down. There's something about how the screen sharing works right now, but feel free to sign up and check out the full list. So we do support over 35 different sources. So it is App Store reviews, Zendesk, Intercom, Front, Freshdesk, Pendogong, Jira, and then you can connect lots and lots of other sources via Zapier directly that are available there. It doesn't currently work for social media. We did support Twitter specifically previously, but Twitter has locked down some of their APIs, and so that the social media piece we're currently rebuilding based on some of the changes to specifically to the Twitter API. But
what
it will
about
be available too.
I'm curious about their reviews on Google. Is it Google? Are you connected to Google in terms of the sentiment analysis from customers and the pain, or that is not part of the scope yet?
It's not part of it yet, but for anything that we currently do not support, you can also upload. You can download it and upload CSV, or if it's Google reviews, one thing that the folks go is to just like copy and paste all of those and get the same kind of summaries, and then we chunk it down so we can do that like mention analysis as well.
Thank you.
Cool. Of course, always adding more sources. So this is all good. Both good questions and good feedback. So really appreciate it. Cool. I'm going to jump to the under the hood view, and this one, and give you a sense of what that process looks like for Kraftful. So this is a much simplified version of what happens under the hood for this type of analysis. But broadly speaking, it includes 3 steps. So we're extracting insights from the user feedback, and then we're summarizing those insights into digestible lists. And then we're matching the original feedback to be able to tell you how frequently issues came up and provide more context. So what you're looking at here is step 1. We're extracting feature requests out of an App Store review, and we do this, we do this with thousands of reviews, as you saw, in seconds, because we can programmatically do this step 1 review at a time. The next step, once we have each of these reviews, and sorry, we should have zoomed in here a little bit more, right? We have, again, the system prompt. We're telling the system that it's a product manager. In reality, we're fine-tuning the model to act more like a product manager. So this is not exactly it. This is just somewhat of an approximation of how our product actually works. And then we are inputting an App Store review, and then we have a prompt that is asking for feature requests from that App Store review. We're using some of these settings. Again, in reality, this is a little bit more complex because there's just more things, more steps that we go through to get to really good summaries. But this hopefully just gives you a sense of how it's extracting the insights. Right now, we know that in this App Store review, we have the the requests, to add the ability to adjust the times for the sensors with thermostats, implement a feature to set sensor schedules based on specific days, allow the use of different sensors for the same time frame, but on different days, right? So this is all extracted from that feature request. And then step 2 is to take all the different feature requests that we get from different App Store reviews. Here, I'm taking a list of 15. In reality, it's thousands and thousands, right? Because sometimes it's thousands of App Store reviews that we're analyzing. And then we're getting kind of more grouped view into when certain feature requests come up multiple times, right? And so now it's grouping it down to more digestible format. And then the very last step, as I mentioned, step 3, is to then run each feature request that we got at the end of this analysis and all the App Store reviews that we had originally, and we run them through an embeddings model to turn them into vectors so that we can then compare those vectors on lots of different dimensions and determine which App Store review included a certain feature request to be able to prioritize certain feature requests over other ones, right? We're giving you a prioritized list on how frequently things came up. And then also to be able to provide that link between those summaries and the App Store reviews so you can go and read more context when you click on them. I was going to switch over to a user story under the hood view, but wanted to see if you had any questions about this summarization piece and how that works before I jump there.
Jana, I have a question. I think it's a follow-up based on what Carolina asked earlier. A big part of PM's role is not only understanding the general customer pain points, but also drill down by segments. So what you show here, the feature request, the App Store review, those represent the general audience. What are some of the additional model you would have to build in order to drill down into the segmentation, like users who sign up in the last 60 days who are now churning or whatever? Is there anything you can do to fine-tune that results?
Yeah, so there are a few things you can do there. One is you can use the chat to ask like specific questions where you say users who talk about home and away feature and also talk about having multiple thermostats as one example, and then be able to triangulate it like that. The other way is to then use the links to original mentions to group your data. So that this actually is in some sense features that we're currently working on, where you're able to then categorize all of your underlying data into specific segments and say, I just want to look at feedback coming from these particular set of users and be able to get a similar kind of view, but only coming from like one subset of your user base. This is not currently in the product. I'm not even jumping to the demo to show you this, but this is coming very shortly. Amal?
I just wanted to better understand this embedding model and how the vector mapping works. So that approach of taking the outputs from the model of the feature requests and then tying it, the purpose of the model is to then tie it back to the specific reviews that generated that feature list, right?
Yeah.
And then that approach of using vectors for that, is that generally how like all kind of GPT driven prompt engineering companies might do this? Or is that an approach that Craftful came up with because they had this unique problem that that GPT couldn't really solve?
Yeah, this is our solution to this very specific problem of being able to link back feedback to, or summaries to feedback. but it is a technique that's used for other things in a lot of GPT-powered applications. It's usually used for anything where you're trying to usually chat with feedback that is too large for the context window. And so it then helps you find a relevant section in a large database of data, and then be able to then use the LLM chat to chat with that context. So that's one example. Embeddings are used in lots and lots of different applications, but I would say that that's the most common use of embeddings. And then we use it in this other way to solve a particular pain point for specifically with user feedback analysis. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that did. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Carolina?
Sorry, I don't want to, I know that there's a lot to cover, but just to wrap up the question, which I thought was a really good, is about the personas or the audience. So a lot of companies have predefined kind of personas you are going after. It could be demographic, web-based, it could be new user, existing user. So do you have a model where you can actually embed the personas and see if you can go against that and see what kind of performance? Because this one looks very generic in terms of like what as a whole, what are the features, but just doubling down on that based on the feedback that I got from you, it's like it's not already there, but you're working on it. So kind of interesting on knowing. Say one thing is like how many people have bought the product, but in the way that I have seen persona is kind of more explicit. It's like either demographics, is it just age? It's, I don't know. So I'm kind of interesting to understand more how you're planning to use.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a few different ways in which we're planning to use this. One is so that you can actually import that data directly from, say, your CRM and triangulate it with the feedback that you're getting, right? Because one type of feedback source you can already connect is Salesforce comments. And so that's one place in which we could pull in that metadata directly and then be able to map it on and say, and give you a way to filter based off of feedback. And then the other way is, because as product managers, we're doing two things, right? One is we are trying to understand the feedback and just get these direct views into like what are my segments of users requesting, or what are they interested in, what features are they using, and that's kind of where we're going to be using all of the data that you currently have to then give you ways to filter it by certain metadata that we're able to pull in. Another type of workflow that we've perceived from our users is that they're using Craftful to tell a story to the dev team about here's what we're building and why, or the dev team or the exec team or whoever they need to kind of present a case to. And so that's kind of where we found that link back to the original mentions of feedback directly from the Jira ticket is helpful, but also be able to put that on the slide may be helpful and that kind of stuff. And so then from that perspective, we're building another set of features that just makes it easy to curate what's already there and be able to put specific labels on. Here's the feedback that I got from this set of users. Here's the feedback that I got from that set of users, right? Because you're analyzing a lot of different types of feedback, both App Store reviews and support tickets, but also user interview notes where you actually know exactly who the user was, and you may know a little bit more that you may want to add into those mentions and be able to paint that richer picture. So that's another set of tools that we're building right now to be able to kind of tell that story in a richer way.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, so let's jump to the user story under the hood, because I know that those that one was an interesting one too. So to give this again, I want to highlight that all of these are very simplified versions of the prompts. This is not actually the prompts we're using. There's some optimization to make sure that they work both in terms of our volume of data and that we're sending in, and we're using fine-tuned models. But Here, I'm asking the model to write a user story and acceptance criteria for a manual heat boost button, right? That's one of the examples we had when we were looking at this on Craftful, which is something that has been requested by Nest users. I'm including all the original feedback for the feature to provide more depth to the request. Here, of course, I'm just including one App Store review for demonstration purposes, but in reality, this would include all of the mentions that requested for this, which inside of a prompt, you actually cannot handle this because of the context window, but we're doing some things to be able to send in all of that data, the underlying data. We're also training the model to provide high quality user stories and acceptance criteria every time. So there's some other things under the hood that's happening. But this should give you an idea of kind of this type of analysis and how it's done, right? That you're providing a prompt with what you want the model to do. You're providing some context to the prompt to give it a little bit more data. And then it is outputting a user story with acceptance criteria. Another way. Okay, I'm getting a question. How will you best how to QA and validate the results? As PMs are developing product tools like Craftful, what is your approach for QA and validation of results? This is a great question. I'm going to save this just for a little bit later to the Q&A, just to wrap up on user stories, and then I'll jump to Q&A, and then I'll make sure to cover this first, right? The one thing I just wanted to highlight is that you can do the same thing with user stories directly in ChatGPT. And kind of just like writing the SQL query directly in ChatGPT, you can write user stories directly in ChatGPT. In this case, I'm using our own plugin to do that. It's a use case that we've heard from our users. Before we built user story building functionality on Craftful, some of our users would go and use the Craftful ChatGPT plugin to write user stories with their feedback and then copy that over to Jira. So that's another way of doing that. This use case is not really what our plugin was designed for. I will put that as an aside, but it does work better than using ChatGPT directly, because it does use over 85 product resources to answer questions about product best practices. Things like, how do I make my product more sticky, or what's a good measure for churn? And as a result, it also incorporates best practices for, how do you write a good user story and a good acceptance criteria. I would say the main limitation of this approach is that you need to collect all of the user feedback that mention a feature and copy and paste that into ChatGPT. And then you're limited by the ChatGPT context window, which means that you can only submit around 2,000 words. So if your text is too long, you'll get an error message saying you need to submit shorter copy. And so then, of course, you can remove some of the comments from your prompt until it fits the context window. But it's a pretty time-consuming process to collect all of the user feedback mentioned and experiment with how to fit the context window. So definitely recommend doing this directly in Craftful as opposed to using our ChatGPT plugin for it. But I just wanted to highlight that this is another possibility that we've seen people do. The plugin itself is really helpful for other best practice questions, so definitely try it out for that. All right, and with that, I'm going to jump to the Q&A, and I have a question about the plugin. So I'm going to do that first, and then I'll jump to the Q&A question about how to build these kind of products. Can you submit it and ask it to summarize and save? Ariana, would you mind asking this question directly, just so I have all of the context?
Sure. I have heard of prompting techniques where when trying to overcome the ChatGPT context window, that you can pause and ask it to summarize the conversation and save to that point, and then be able to feed more. Would that be an option if trying to analyze like a ton of feedback directly in ChatGPT?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So what you could do is you can put in as much feedback as it will take. So 2,000 characters of comments, and then you can ask it for summary, and then you can take that summary, put it somewhere else, and take your next 2,000 characters, put that in, and do that until you've gone through all of your the underlying feedback, and then take all of the summaries you have, and then put those summaries in and ask it to write a feature request. That's a great point. You can definitely do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. I'm gonna jump back to Carmen's question. Carmen, do you maybe want to ask this question directly?
Yeah, thank you. It's two parts. I think one is a user of something like Craftful or like Mixpanel, as we're trying to either build our user stories or whether we're building analytics. What's the best way for us to QA the results that we get back? Because these are things that we're going to be driving either stakeholder commitment, things like that. And then the follow-up question is, as the PM of building a product and tool like Craftful, how are you guys approaching QA? Like, is it the typical, run, some testing and then you human validate it? Like, what are the approaches that you take as the sort of owner of like a Craftful?
Yeah, let me answer it in reverse order. So for our product, how we QA it, we have a number of ways to do it. One is that we obviously, as we're developing the prompts, we're doing very diverse application on lots and lots of different user feedback to make sure that it covers, feedback where it's like really lengthy answers, or when people include code in the answers when it's a very technical product, or when you get people who are responding in small chunks and you have back-to-back conversations with agents, right? And so we're really running the gamut of different types of user feedback when we're first doing our own original QA testing before launching our product. We then have automated testing that we run periodically to against a set feedback to make sure that it's performing the same way over and over again. We have tied our analysis to a LLM model that's fixed in time. So for example, if you go and use a ChatGPT right now, that model is constantly evolving. So when it outputs something one day, the next day, your prompt may work very differently because the model itself has changed. Our underlying model doesn't change like that. It is a fixed model. So we can control the output a little bit more, but then there may be other factors, right? So we're trying to control for all of those different factors. And then in addition to that, we have user feedback on the output that we're getting at any point in time. I can actually just jump quickly to this, but if you're looking at any one of our summaries, they all have a way for users to give us feedback on, or even if you go to the chat history, right? There's always this way for users to provide feedback on the output, and we do quite a bit of analysis with that. Actually, we also use that to improve our analysis at any point in time. But that's another way that we use for making sure that the quality both continues being high quality, but also that we're constantly improving it over time. The other question, as a PM, how do you make sure that that what you're using is actually high quality and correct? I would say, we in our product we have this way to then be able to go and read original mentions, and that's a way to empower product managers to be able to check the model at any point in time and see, you're probably not going, when there's like thousands and thousands of App Store reviews that went into something, you're probably not going to read all of the thousands, but you can do a quick sample check and see, do I agree with this kind of analysis? Is it doing a good job, right? And going back to it's actually really hard to go back to the slide from June, right? But they're giving you a way to expand from the, I just asked for number of users that signed up to my product in the past week, and then they gave me a number as a response. But then you can also expand their view and look at the SQL query that it wrote for me and use that to query. And so then you can check that query, right? So that's another way of understanding, did the model do what you wanted it to do for you, right?
Thank you. Very helpful.
Great. Claire, you have a question?
Hey there. Thanks for a great
Hey.
presentation. My question, I guess, is a little bit tangential to analytics, but it relates to your experience at Craftful and building a tool or a whole company that's reliant on a single third party. And I'm curious how you think about building your models and tools in a way that's extensible should anything kind of like external happen, you know, at a much smaller scale. I'm going through the same thing, building an OpenAI integration within like a broader suite of tools, but sometimes it feels risky to be putting all of the eggs in one basket from a third party perspective. So I'd love your take on that. Yes,
we've actually we've done a few different things. So in the beginning, when we started building this, we experimented with a lot of different models and tried to build this with different large language models and actually different machine learning solutions generally. And we ultimately decided to go down this path because it was just a much better output. But over time, there was a point in time when we also exceeded the limit of how much feedback that could be analyzed with GPT-4. And that actually forced us to diversify and send our requests both to OpenAI and to Azure. And so we were having our requests run against two APIs, which was also, of course, helpful for like just reliability purposes and have two pipelines running. I do think that's, you know, the way I think about it is that you have to think about what is your solution and can you build it with what tools can you use for your solution, and depending on what it is. For example, if you have a one-shot versus a multi-shot application, which is kind of like our users providing examples when you're doing, depending on what your analysis is, then you can apply less performant models and potentially be a little bit more in control. Like you can use open source models and have more control over that, as opposed to leveraging a third party model. Sorry, Claire, did that answer your question?
It did, thank you.
Wonderful. Rashmi?
Hi, a couple of questions. When you talked about just now with the last statement, the last couple of statements with, looking at various different kinds of machine learning models and the LLMs and things, when you initially had your MVP implemented, right, the first version of the product, what was kind of your model accuracy in that sense, just from utilizing some of these underlying technologies?
Yeah, so the very first MVP, or the very first prototype, I would say, I built with GPT-3 in early 2020, and it was terrible. It was actually to the point where I did not think that it would be a viable solution for a while. I mean, there were certain things that looked promising enough where it was some pieces looked kind of right, but it really wasn't until, and so our very first solution that we built with GPT-4 ended up being a sentiment analysis as opposed to an actual summarization analysis. And I say this, sorry, I should have flagged that, large language models are a text generation tool. They're not a summarization tool. conceptually speaking, right? So it took a while for the models to get really good at summarization as opposed to text generation. And so that's what they were really good at in the beginning. But we did lots of work to get at a good enough sentiment analysis for it. And really our very first LLM-based feature that we launched back in 2021 was a sentiment analysis solution. And then we continued experimenting on this kind of summarization solution over time. And it wasn't until the Da Vinci model, which was the model that came out right before ChatGPT came out, that we saw really promise in this. Is now large language models are becoming good enough to be able to power summarization tools. And that's when we started really building this out. This is in the fall of 2022.
Got it. Thank you. If I may, can I ask a few more questions? Till I see another hand raised.
Absolutely. Go for it.
All right. One of the things I had in mind, even when you started initially with the conversation, was wondering if Craftful was kind of ahead of its time, because I know you said you started working on this in 2019 itself, where, now on the timeline that you showed with respect to Amplitude, mixed balancing, they're still having their, versions and beta and things. So was it really required? So I'm guessing the wave of the ChatGPT and the maturity of the models, I think, was really required, I guess, for you to be in the prime spot, even though you kind of started pretty early on in this, when nobody even, or the mainstream companies didn't think about investing so much in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I do think it gave us somewhat of an advantage to have experimented with these models early, just because we kind of knew we knew how they're evolving. And so that also gives me a sense when I'm building with GPT-4 today, I have some sense of the limitations that I'm seeing in GPT-4, which limitations are going to go away, which limitations do I think will go away based on what I saw from GPT-3 back in 2020 to where GPT-4 is today, right? So I think there's certain things that are on our roadmap that are like big strategic things that we're looking to build that are absolutely not possible with GPT-4 today, but I do think will be possible with probably GPT-5, and we're planning for that. So in that sense, I think it's good to have started early, but otherwise, yes, there's no, the tools weren't there until really at the end of last year.
That's awesome. I think you made a really good point. We as product leaders, when we think about, how we build products strategically and differentiate them, one of the things, especially that's very valid for the models now and the LLMs, is you kind of trying to build something that might eventually get it for free from a model maturity perspective, and have that vision of understanding that, to your point, hey, I understand this enough to say that we will probably get this in the next version, and there's no use of investing in ourselves, just trying to build that when the model itself will actually catch up.
Exactly. I think that's a really good point. And to put a practical example to that, I think one thing we've evaluated pretty significantly is how much do we invest in fine-tuning? Now that there are fine-tuning tools available, how much do we fine-tune the model to perform certain things versus wait for the model to be able to do it on its own? And that's something we've really had to think deeply about. We only fine-tune certain models that underline our product, and other ones we're using off the shelf as they are and just are waiting for them to improve. Right. So it's a great point. I just wanted to put it like a tangible example behind it.
Absolutely makes sense. Thank you.
Amal, you have a question.
Thank you. Yeah, in making the transition from only using OpenAI to using OpenAI and Azure in conjunction, were there any major lessons learned for Craftful?
Yeah, I think the biggest lessons were more around our architecture and the things we needed to think through as we were interacting with it's a great question, with two different APIs. I think, our architecture was really built around just interacting with one. And so that was a big project to to build it out, to be able to use both. Of course, on the other side of those APIs, they're still use the same models. So a lot of what we had already built was reusable completely, right? So we just needed to build out the architecture. I think if we wanted to start leveraging different APIs that have different models, then we would need to rethink everything. We need to rethink our prompting. We need to rethink kind of our whole workflow to fit those models. So I think that would be a much bigger project to be able to make that happen. But I think that's generally it's going to be architectural problems. One way or another, it's going to be architectural problems.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Anything in the chat? Rashmi.
Okay, I'll ask another one.
Go for it. These are great questions, so keep them coming.
No, that's great. I think this has been very helpful going into the details here, Yana. So one question I had was now, the best part about, the ChatGPT and especially the natural language search is irrespective of how complicated the products are, how complicated the user experience is, you always have this one layer where you can simply ask questions and kind of get the output for it. So then when in some sense, if this user experience has been simplified, to a certain extent with using some of these interfaces, what do you think would be now the competitive advantage for a lot of these products, not just in product analytics or maybe in product analytics to be specific about? What would you think then? Would it be more about being able to get more data and more context from a differentiation standpoint, apart from, of course, you're thinking of different use cases? But really, what would you think the core differentiation would be when user experience is simplified to a certain extent?
Yeah. I think to some extent there may be differentiation from a user experience perspective too, in that for example, our product could be just a chat, right, where you really are just chatting with your user feedback and getting answers. And in that context, the only value we would provide is that we're importing all of the data for you, so you don't have to copy and paste it, and we're overcoming the context window so that you can ask questions of a large volume of data. But what we found is that actually the chat is not the best way for people to get insights. And with the features that we're providing, most of our users are relying on our lists of feature requests, and they're actually not even necessarily just relying on the list of feature requests in Craftful, but they're really waiting for them to show up in Slack or email. And then when they see feature requests, because they automatically just show up there, right? And then they wait for those to come up, and then they act on that and create user stories, right? So that was what sort of, from a user experience perspective, I think there's still going to be whatever is the specific solution, the analogous solution to that, there may be that. But there still is, in addition to the user experience, I do think that the data is going to be really critical. And what I say by that is that when we see users importing all of their user feedback, and so we're learning from what does user feedback look like, and how do we get insights from user feedback? How do we fine-tune a model to understand how to get insights out of user feedback from different sources, right? Call transcripts are very different from App Store reviews or survey data, right? Where it's very dense with feedback versus a call transcript where you have like two people talking, very different type of underlying data. And then the fact that we now have, thousands of users using Craftful, we see them interacting with these summaries, so we can see, okay, now they're taking this summary and they're making that into feature requests. That's a good summary. The ones they ignored were probably not good summaries. And we can do this kind of training that's both for across all our users and also for specific organizations to learn what's important to them, right, over time. So we can really get kind of a superior analysis to someone else.
That's very insightful. Thank you.
Well, okay. Carolina?
Hi, Jana. Thank you for the oral presentation. It's been super helpful. I would love to kind of see more the analytic component to see, maybe we went through that very quickly, but maybe going back to the app and see how you display the analytics and how it could actually break it down in ways of use. That might be very helpful too.
I unfortunately am not able to go into the app itself with June, which is really the only place where you can go into the app, because it does have all of our user data inside of it. So unfortunately, I was constrained by just taking screenshots of what it does so that I'm not showing confidential user data. This is the problem with analytics tools. There isn't anything that's high level enough to be able, like with the App Store reviews, right? That's just public data that obviously I can showcase. But unfortunately, with the analytics tools, I can't really go into too much depth. Though I would really encourage you, if you are using segments, it is a very quick process to pipe that data into June, so you can go and play with June functionality with your own data and check it out, or Amplitude and Mixpanel when those features do become available. I will say that from playing with it, it still is quite limited in terms of what it can do, but I do think it's definitely going to evolve and become a much bigger component of how we interact with product analytics.
Thank you.
So Kara, I have a question.
Hi there. You mentioned early on that some of the AI tools are not live yet or have not been launched. Do you know the best way to kind of track and keep up with actual launch date, or when they'll be ready to go live?
It's a good question. I would say if you are an Amplitude or Mixpanel user, I would just continue. I would sign up for those. I've signed up for both of them, and just see whenever they do launch in the product, right? Because they have launched, they do say that they're publicly available and that you should be able to use them, but they are not. And so I think that the best solution would just be to be in the product and wait for when the feature becomes available. I would say, kind of having seen this with a few tools in the past, like Notion was probably one of the early ones that like launched with kind of more of a marketing launch, and then ultimately had their feature available. Like you will just get an email saying, now you can go and experiment with it, and that's probably the best way. Otherwise, I think the other way that I found helpful is to watch Product Hunt launches. And so oftentimes companies will launch on Product Hunt, and it is kind of not exactly acceptable to launch just marketing launches on Product Hunt. Like, you don't get good feedback from users. So I think Product Hunt launches tend to be actual launches where people can go and play with the product in the product. So that's another place to watch for when folks launch on Product Hunt. It tends to be the complete the actual solution, as opposed to just a marketing launch.
Thank you.
Jana, I'm not seeing any more questions, but I guess to bring us home, Craftful is a productivity tool for product managers. I'm curious, how do you expect this target audience, product managers, use Craftful? The reason why I'm saying is, if I use the tool to understand customer pain points, whether it's on iOS or Android app, when I go in to look at the customer feedback today versus 3 months from now, I don't think there's going to be a huge difference. Like, what the pain points are likely will be the same. So I'm curious how you are thinking about driving the stickiness and then the repeated usage from product managers to continue to use Craftful, not only to understand the customer feedback, but also to improve the overall productivity. I think the Jira conversion is really powerful. Just would love to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what we're seeing is depends on the types of sources that you're connecting. And so if you're using it to analyze survey data, then whatever is your most or user interview notes, if you're uploading user interview notes, right, which is another major use case that we've seen on Craftful. I would say kind of the top use cases that we're seeing, it's App Store review analysis, support ticket analysis, user interview notes, and survey data. Those are kind of the top user interview notes or user interview call transcripts. Those are the top ones that we're seeing. And so some of these naturally will have new data, right? Like user interview notes and user interview calls, like that's the whole point. The reason we do user interviews is to get new insights out of users. But then for the information that constantly updates, there usually is a change in the data, right? So if you're seeing support tickets or App Store reviews, when the product evolves, users will react to those changes, and that's what you're seeing in the feedback that keeps coming in. So that's kind of why we're seeing that. That's why we're hearing that a big use case is people are watching their emails, and then when new things come up, they go and act on the feedback, as opposed to necessarily kind of curating the feedback in the platform. So I think there's a few different ways in which kind of we're seeing people use it as they're waiting for new things, or they're inputting new information that they've learned from users by doing user research and or analyzing that directly in our platform, and then creating Jira tickets or linear tickets or whatever is the platform that they use with that feedback. So it really depends on, are you using it to monitor the feedback that you're getting, or are you using it, or you can do both, of course, or is the workflow that you're gathering feedback and then you're using it as your repository of all of that feedback to summarize it, organize it, and then act on it with Jira tickets. Of course, there's like more curation tools that we have in the product that I didn't necessarily touch on as much, which is just editing the AI generated summaries to be able to then tell a story to your team about, here's what we're working on, right? Like we do that initial prioritization for you, where we say, here's the number one thing because it got mentioned the most times. But then you can say, actually, yes, it got mentioned the most times, but we know about it. We're already working on it. We don't want it to be top of our list. So we can remove it, and you can have the next items that you pull up and say, this is the more important one, or add your own, and add kind of some additional context that you want the team to see. So it's a bit of a workspace to collaborate around user feedback, to then be able to export it to the places where the development team is going to interact with it in Jira, in Linear, Trello, whatever may be the platform. I have a question here from Ramya.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for the lovely session today. So one question is, I just wanted to see how I can put this to use because I'm leading a migrations project. So a lot of partners, hundreds and hundreds of them, are moving from one offer to the other. And then our internal engineering team has put together a set of tools for them to migrate over from the old platform to the new one. Now, my question is, we are trying to solicit partner feedback, but it's very difficult. Some of them are very vocal. They are able to give us feedback, but some of them are not. There's a language barrier as well. We have partners from Europe and other parts of the world where we don't get real, meaningful feedback because they struggle, right? So now I wanted to see how your tool, is there a way that we could use it? Now that I have to do more research about it, but just wanted to check if you've had any plugins like that, or have you plugged in your tool for such migrations or to understand and evaluate tools?
Mhm.
and solicit feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I will note is that we support over 100 different languages. So when you do get feedback in different languages, you can get it all summarized in English and or any other language that your team operates in. So we have we support teams in Europe, in Asia, in lots and lots of different countries. The type of ways I would kind of go about, if I'm thinking about the specific use case that you described, is you probably want to survey your partners in this process and then gather all of their feedback and summarize it and then start interacting with it. And you probably want to create survey questions in their original language if you have users in different regions. So I would probably, we don't have this directly supported in Kraftful itself, but you may want to use the Kraftful plugin inside ChatGPT for that, to ask it to help you formulate survey questions and then translate those to the relevant languages to be able to ask survey questions directly in the people's the users or the partners language, so you can get more engagement from them because they're probably more likely to interact with them when it is in their own language, and then summarize all of that and then import that survey data to Kraftful and summarize it there, because we do support all of those languages, and then you'll get summaries in English.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great.
And one last question though, it's just out of curiosity. So is it okay if I email you, or are we able to reach you after the session?
Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to reach out. I am just Jana@kraftful.com. So feel free to reach out to me there. Or, if you do sign up, feel free to reach out via our intercom channel. I would say that that's probably a faster way to just get support on Kraftful itself, because my mailbox is a bit of a mess right now.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for all these questions. Jana, any parting thoughts? Sounds like people can reach out to you on jana@kraftful.com. Anything you wanted to share with the group before we wrap?
Yeah, I think, thank you so much for all the questions. Really enjoyed chatting about this. Again, a topic I'm incredibly passionate about. I would say, I would encourage you all to try out all of these tools, particularly, as they become available, or if they're already available. Try it out. Try out using ChatGPT for a lot of these things. If you have an idea that currently isn't solved by a tool, we've had users, as kind of how we learned about. We did have the user story writing tool on our roadmap, but then we knew that we had to prioritize it because people were using ChatGPT or the Kraftful plugin inside ChatGPT to do it. So we knew, okay, this is such a big pain point that they're going through all of this hassle to do it. We should probably prioritize it and build it faster. But my point with that is to say that a lot of things can be done directly within ChatGPT. So experiment with it. Try it out. If something doesn't work, I would not assume that it's not gonna work. Just that you may need to iterate on the prompt. You may need to wait for the model to get better, to kind of some of the points that I made earlier. And ultimately, I think a lot of the pain points that you have will probably be able to be solved with large language models, even if they're not today. So I would just encourage you to play around with it and try it out, and have patience with these bots as they're evolving, growing, and getting better.
Awesome. Well, Jana, I want to thank you so much. Anyone wanted to raise their hand and say what you took away with before we wrap? I'm gonna call on people. Claire, hey, what did you learn? And then feel free to popcorn to someone else. Spread the love.
Sure. Yeah, no, today I was super impressed with all the offerings and tools. I know analytics and kind of summarizing all the user feedback is a constant struggle, and interpreting the data. And of course, this is, you got to check the data, but it's great to have these tools and So you can focus on maybe the areas where your strengths lie, and then also have this to back up any product decisions. And I really enjoyed that. And yeah, the series overall, it was great to hear different aspects of AI and learn how, as product managers, we can leverage this to, grow ourselves in the field. Cool. I will hand it off to Kara.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. And as someone who really is not familiar with AI, I haven't used it too much. This was just really helpful just to understand all the different resources that we can use and how to use it. The use cases that were given kind of helps me get a better idea of how to use the tool.
Yes, we'll hear from one more person because people start to drop off, probably because of they don't want to be called on. I am going to call on Amal. You asked a lot of great questions, so would love to hear your takeaway.
It's hard to pick just one. The session covered so many really interesting things. I think the thing that I took away the most was really understanding the nuts and bolts of how to build on top of an LLM. I know we didn't get into a lot of detail of what the specific prompts look like that Craftful is using, of course, but understanding the structure of how things flow, the journey to diversifying, and then how you're thinking about planning ahead and planning for features that aren't available yet, and how the model may not function today but can function in the future was super interesting and exciting to learn about. So thank you for such an awesome session, Yana.
Thank you all. Ariana, do we have another event next Tuesday for Marily's hackathon?
We do. Tuesday is the hackathon with Marily Nika. It'll be a really hands-on, super fun opportunity to take everything that we've gone over in the last few weeks and really start putting it to the test. I just really wanted to thank you all, and thank you so much, Evelyn and Yana, for hosting.
Well, thank you all. I guess we'll see a lot of you in next Tuesday, the Halloween days for the AI hackathon. And with that, thank you, Yana, and thank you, everyone.